Hi folks, my name is Nik Charlebois. I am part of the Microsoft Graph Customer and Partner Experience team with Brian. And today we're going to be talking about Microsoft Graph Data Connect. So what is Microsoft Graph Data Connect? Well, first off, when you think of the Microsoft Graph ecosystem, there are really three main components to it. The first one, which is the one you're seeing on the top left of this infogram here, is the REST APIs. REST APIs have been around for several years now. We're all used to them. They offer CRUD operations, so create, read, update, and delete, mostly transactional stuff, and they would deal with data that is specific to a user context in most cases. Right? We have application permissions that allow you to go and grab information about everything in a tenant, but most of the time it's going to be around revolving around the specific users. Then in the top right corner, we have the graph connectors, which allow you to ingest on-premises data into the graph. And the bottom part is the focus of this session today, which is the Microsoft Graph Data Connect that allows you to extract information in bulk out of Microsoft 365. The advantages of using Microsoft Graph Data Connect, well, the first one is the data at scale. When you think of the REST APIs are not really built to be able to go and extract millions and millions of rows of data to be able to generate analytics and insights. Microsoft Graph Data Connect is built for this specific purpose. So when you're doing Microsoft Graph Data Connect exports of your data, you're not being subject to throttling. So for example, when you're using the REST API, if you want to go and grab emails for everybody in the organization to be able to do analysis on who's been interacting with whom inside of the enterprise, well, you're going to be limited to 10,000 emails per user per hour. Right? That's the throttling limits that we have. When you're using Microsoft Graph Data Connect, you're going to be able to go and get the information about everything within only a few minutes, right? So you're not subject to throttling. So that's the first part. The second part is the granular content. So when you go in, and let's say what you're trying to build is exactly what I described there. You're trying to get insights as to who inside the organization communicates with whom, right? What groups are talking with what group more often. What you can do is you can go in and you essentially define a contract between the application that you're running that will go and extract that information and the tenant admins. And that contract will define a few things. It will define for what users you want to go and extract the information from, right? It could be all users in the tenant, or it could be just specific Azure AD groups. You can say, I only want to get information about emails from the legal and the finance team, for example. So that's the first part of the contract. The second one is the list of fields you want to go and export. And currently, if you were to grant an application that uses the REST API, if you were to grant it access to read information about emails and use something like mail.readAll, by default, that application would have access to read everything about the email. That includes the actors, so the carbon copy, BCC. It will also include information about the subject, the body. Yes, we have a mail, the read the basic permission that will filter that out, but you still get everything by default, right? Whereas with Microsoft Graph Data Connect, you can go in and go very granularly and say, I only want to get the to field. I don't want to get the carbon copy, for example. I don't want to get the body, the attachments, the subject, and so on. So you decide what fields you want to extract. Right, so we have customers that are doing, what they do is they only care about the actors, so they'll extract the carbon copy, the BCC field. And we have the opposite as well. We have customers that all they want to know is the sentiment of the messages that are being exchanged, but they want to filter out the actors, right, for privacy concerns. All they care about is the content. So they do the opposite. They filter out the carbon copy BCC, and they focus on the actual content. So this is what granular content is inside of Microsoft Graph Data Connect. And then security and governance. Once that contract is established from your application, you submit a request to the tenant admins to go and extract that information. The tenant admins will receive that through what we call the Privileged Access Management Portal in Microsoft 365. And they can review the list of fields that you're asking for, saying, all right, so you know what? This application is asking for information about the BCC and carbon copy field. And then they're asking for data about the legal and finance team. But I know that the CEO of the company is part of the legal team. So I can further refine the scope of the application and say, yes, I'll let you extract information about the legal team, but I'll filter out Bob, who's the CEO of the company, for example. So you have that governance model that's in place, right? Where you can actually have different steps of approval, and the tenant admin can always refine or even revoke access to your application, right? If they review it and they see that you're trying to get content, they can say, no, we're not approving this, and therefore you'll never be able to go and extract that information. What is Microsoft Graph Data Connect concretely? Well, it's a component of Azure Data Factory. So there is an Azure play here. So then in order for you to use Microsoft Graph Data Connect, you need to go and deploy an Azure Data Factory in your tenant. And Microsoft Graph Data Connect, what it is, it's a data source for an action inside of Data Factory. So when Data Factory, when you start playing with this, it's essentially, think of it as a visual almost workflow where you would go in and you would do your extract, transform, load. You would say, all right, first off, copy the data out of Microsoft 365 and into this storage account. Then take that data, massage it in a certain way, and then push it somewhere else. But when you're extracting that data from Microsoft 365, this is what Microsoft Graph Data Connect is. It's the source of where you're pulling the information from. Okay, so Microsoft Graph Data Connect, no throttling, you extract the fields you want and only for the specific users. And at the end, what you're going to get is your raw data exported as JSON files in a storage account. So what you need to do in order for you to use Microsoft Graph Data Connect, you deploy that Azure Data Factory. Inside of it, you would create what we call a Data Factory pipeline. That pipeline will define what the source is, in this case, Microsoft 365 dataset, which is Microsoft Graph Data Connect. You create your Azure storage at the other end. And in order for you, we support, by the way, blob storage or Azure Data Lake Storage version 2, Gen 1, Gen 2, actually. So you decide how you want to do your Azure storage. And in order for your pipeline to authenticate, you need to create an Azure AD app registration. So we only support authenticating with Service Principal right now. So you go in, you authenticate your pipeline, and then the data set will be extracted and copied over to the data lake, right? I think this needs to be updated. We don't actually remove the data is just being copied over. Now, the data always resides in the client's environment. Okay, so if I'm an ISV and I'm building something, I need to deploy the Azure components in the customer's environment in order for us to run this. This is one thing we're considering right now, trying to do a multi-tenant approach where we want to let ISVs that are building solution deploy the Azure components in their environment and essentially just make that contract I was talking about, make that request to a remote tenant, have that remote tenant approve the contract, and then have the data pull down into the ISV's tenant to do analysis and insights. Okay, so this is something that is in the work, but right now the components have to exist in the customer's tenant. So what data set do we currently support? We have data sets around the user profile, right? Everything that is in Azure AD, so information about the users, what their office location is, what their phone numbers are. We have Oracle information, so who the managers are, who the direct reports are. So if you need to go and build an org chart, you can use that and extract information about all users. We have a lot of data sets around Outlook artifacts. So message, this is the emails. We have event, sent item, right? So very important, the difference between message and sent item. In some cases, people only care about emails that are being exchanged inside of the organization. So when you use sent item, you only get the emails that your employees have sent out, right? Whereas when you get the message data set, you get all emails, even emails coming from outside. Sometimes there might be spam in there, right? So we offer the two options. Calendar view, contact, mailbox settings, right? If you're building something and try to understand, all right, I don't know, are people putting out of office, right? You want to do kind of a cross-reference between the calendar events when people are booking off time during the summer and if they're putting their out of office on. Mailbox setting will tell you about this. This mailbox has the out of office activated and so on. Mail folders. From a Teams perspective, we have Teams chat. So that is one-on-one and group chats, right? So one-to-many chats. We don't have Teams channel discussions yet. This is something we are working on. And then on the far right, from a SharePoint Online perspective, we have the file sharing report data set that is currently in private preview. So it's going to be rolled out to everybody within the next few months. This data set, essentially what it contains is information about all files and items in a specific site and who it's been shared with internally and externally. right? So we have a list of all the users that have access to that file, all the groups that are able to read, to modify that file, and so on. So this is the sharing data set that we're about to roll out. Upcoming data sets. So those are data sets we have on the backlog for the next, I want to say, 3 to 12 months, okay? The first one is the group membership. The other one is everything that has to do with task group, calendar group emails, meeting chats, right? Channel discussion, call records. This is a big one. This is around, all right, who's been attending the meeting? Who had their camera turned on, right? This is big for education folks, right? They want to understand what students actually joined the meeting, how long was the meeting, what documents were shared during the meetings. And then meeting transcript is another one that's going to be very interesting when you think about doing Azure Cognitive Services on top of it, right? Text analytics, what was discussed during the meetings, automatically highlight certain action items and so on. And then usage report for SharePoint Online is around who's been editing a file, creating files, deleting files, moving files, renaming files. You get the idea. Okay, I saw a question there around, sorry, I'm just going to quickly scroll. So tenant to tenant migration, this is not the purpose here. This is really more for insights and analytics because we let you pull the data out, but I mean, you're going to be faced with troubling if you try to pull it back in somewhere else. Okay, so this is really more for reporting purposes. Couple of things I want to discuss today. We are helping you get started with Microsoft Graph Data Connect. And as part of this, we created a couple of what we call Solution Accelerators. We have 3 Solution Accelerators right now that are available on GitHub. If you do a search for Microsoft Graph Data Connect solutions on GitHub, you're going to find the repository where all those solutions are stored. And the first one we have is something we call project staffing. So project staffing is something that combines data from on-premises HR system with data from the calendar, the messages, Teams chat of the user. So this is by the way, the GitHub repo I was telling you about. So let me just do it while I'm here. So this is the GitHub repo we have. In there, we have a section called Solutions, and you're going to find project staffing in here. And we have all the instructions on how to get started. You can grab that code, you can deploy it in your environment, you can plug it into your own data source, your own on-premises HR system if you want to, and then feed the data back up. And essentially what it allows you to do is to create the most effective teams for projects. And essentially, so what I have here, so let's say I want to do a project. And I need somebody with PowerShell skills. I'm going to go in, I'm going to search for that. And based on the emails, the discussions, right? We're surfacing entities using Azure Cognitive Search, Azure Cognitive Text Services, Text Analytics, and we know who are the PowerShell subject matter experts in the enterprise. So let's say we scroll down a bit and we go to Joe. So if I take a look at Joe here, I can see that Joe currently is available. His calendar seems to be fairly empty, actually, because he's been available for almost 6 months now. I can see that, all right, so this is his skill set. I want to add him to my team. I can go in, view who's part of my team. I can export that and so on, right? But this is really showcasing the power of extracting information about communications and surfacing some entities with Azure Cognitive Services. I just saw Jim's comment. Yeah, this is a demo we created. People were more busy when we first released that back in April. But yes, these guys now tends to be fairly available. So this is the first project we have. So feel free to go and grab this and get started with your project, right? You can deploy that in your own environment. We have all the steps on how to get started. The second solution that we have is something we call conversation lineage. So this is really showcasing how to go and get started with Azure Cognitive Services, Text Analytics, along with Azure Synapse. And so essentially, it's a bunch of Power BI visualization that we created that you can grab. It will show you, for example, one of the scenario we're seeing a lot of customers do is understanding the sentiment of their customers over time through the various communication channels. Okay, so let me give you an example. So for example, back in April, customer A reached out to me, and based on the language used in the communication in the email, the sentiment wasn't that great, right? Like they were not happy with our services. We exchanged a couple of emails, and based on those exchanges, you can see that this overall sentiment increased, right? It improved. So, and then at one point, we had a couple of teams exchange and sentiment dropped drastically. So what happened there, right? Being able to go and drill in and try to understand what was it. Maybe because we talked about a specific service that we were offering that they weren't interested in, and we were a little too pushy, right? So try to understand how that works. So this is something you can go and grab. The third accelerator that we have is something called water cooler. So water cooler is about figuring out the best time for people to be meeting, right, based on events. Right? It is really just a showcase of how you can use Microsoft Graph Data Connect in your solutions. But this will allow you to punch your schedule and then try to figure out what the best times would be for you to meet with your colleagues if you had to schedule a meeting, right? All leveraging the power of Graph Data Connect. The last thing I wanted to talk about was the ARM templates that we have. So we created a couple of Azure Resource Manager templates for you to be able to get started. We have two right now. We have a generic pipeline, and the other one we have is a multi-tenant data copy. So essentially what it will do is it will deploy all your components, your Azure Data Factory, your pipeline. It will connect it with your Microsoft Graph Data Connect, Microsoft 365 data. And then once the export is done, it will take that raw JSON file that was created and it will copy it back to another tenant storage account using a secure access token. Okay, so this is all baked in. So for example, if you go in, these are all one-click deploy. So you can go in, it will give you an information. So all right, so as part of this template, you need to provide the app ID that you're going to be using, the app secret to authenticate with. You need to select your data set, specify the shared access signature URL of the destination storage and what container you want to go and deploy it into. So if you go in here, click deploy on that, and automatically what's going to happen is you're going to be presented with the quick deploy form for your Azure template. And then you just need to go and fill in the information, right? So fill in information about the data set, which data set you want. So those are all the data sets I mentioned. So let's say I want to get the Teams chat. I pass in the URL, the app ID, app secret, and I click create, and it will automatically go and get everything deployed in your environment. So you don't need to go and figure out what are the steps to deploy. It's one click and everything will be in there. That completes the demo part of this, this here. All the links, by the way, to the accelerators are in the deck. So you're going to have access to that after the session. And now is the time to go and take a look. I saw a couple of questions in there. Brian, do you have any questions that stand out?
Yep, I got two quick questions here. One from Thomas. Are there any limitations of MGDC for GCC tenants?
I should have mentioned that. Sorry, my bad. Yes, right now we don't have support for GCC and GCCI. We are, however, getting close to getting support. We're working on this. There are some additional technical challenges with these environments, but we are working on this because this is one of the big asks that we're getting from customers.
Excellent. And then we have a question from Andre. Are you working closely with third-party app developers, gold partners, so they can leverage from these new data sets?
We are. We're always looking to have a chat with any partners that could be interested in leveraging MGDC, right? So if you are interested in getting more information on how you could use that as part of your application, please reach out. You have my contact info. You can find me on Twitter at Nik Charlebois. The challenge is always to spell my last name. I mean, more than happy to get on the call and help you get started with that. But yes, we are meeting with several ISVs and third-party app developers.
Excellent. I don't think I saw any other questions. I'll take a quick scan through on here. Nope, I think all the rest were answered. And thank you, Gladys, for pitching in on a few. One, just to reiterate that was in the chat was, does the Azure AD tenant, is it required to be the same one for Azure as the one that's being used for Office 365? And I believe Gladys confirmed that is true.
Yeah, it is. And this is one of the things as well that multi-tenant scenario, right, I was talking about. This is one thing we're hoping to solve as well. So if you have multiple subscriptions, for example, or you want to export to a different Azure subscription than where your Microsoft 365 environment is hosted, for example, to be able to support that. But currently, yes, it's a one-to-one, so it has to go and get exported to the same Azure tenant.
Oh, and then one other last question just came in. Does Graph Data Connect allow for querying the, I think this is T indicators? Not familiar with what that is. Beta/security/T indicators.
Brett, do you mind going off mute for a sec if you're able to? Actually, I'm not sure, Brian, but just to elaborate a bit more on what you mean by this, because I'm not sure I understand the question.
I think we disabled the mics for participants.
I want to just elaborate on that in the chat. In the meantime, I'll take Gretchen's question. So on privacy law, so right now we're also enforcing geolocation, right? So when you do the export, we only allow you to export the data in the same geolocation where your data is stored. So this is how we're enforcing it right now. So this is why it's going to be kind of a challenge. We still need to figure out a couple of things when we're dealing with that multi-tenant scenario, because we want to make sure you don't go and extract EU information into like a US tenant, for example, right? So, but right now this is enforced on geolocation wise.
And then, Brett, if you want to follow up in the chat window, we can go ahead and try and answer your question offline because we are nearing towards the end of our session for today. All right. Anything else, Nik, from your perspective, or anything else you'd like to share?
No, that's it. Thanks for having me, folks.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Nik, and Gladys as well in the wings, helping answer questions on the side. Really appreciate getting to see Microsoft Graph Data Connect and a number of the different scenarios that helps address, especially the solution accelerators. It's great to see some kind of pre-made kind of suggestions for how to use the data.